What if feeling stressed and being damaged by stress weren't actually the same thing? What if a supplement could lower stress hormones without actually sedating you? What if another one didn't make you feel calmer at all, but quietly protected you in your sleep and your immune system and your metabolism? And what if some supplements that people swear by for stress barely move the needle, while others have effect sizes comparable to actually medications, but almost nobody talks about them? Well, these aren't hypotheticals, they're biologic facts, and they're backed up by randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses. So today, I'm going to break down the best supplements for stress. Now, stress is everywhere, right? Mostly everyone feels it to a certain degree, but it's your resiliency to stress that matters. For example, two totally different people can get into an argument, right, with their best friend, and one of them will be devastated for weeks, and the other one just kind of shrugs it off. So that's called stress resiliency. And it's pretty key to be able to manage and handle stress. But clearly the best ways to manage stress are obvious, right? If possible, fix the source of your stress. Number two, certainly counseling is the way to go. And number three, exercise is hands down the most powerful intervention we have for being resilient to stress and handling stress. So let's be honest though, sometimes it's not enough, right? So you need a helping hand. And if you want options without like turning to medications or weed or whatever, today I want to show you something very specific. There are supplements that can, one, reduce how stressed you feel, and two, actually reduce what the stress is doing to your body. Now, I've done the hard work of digging through the research, and today I'm going to show you what my top evidence-based choices are based on effectiveness and safety. So, based on all this research, today I'm going to show you, number one, my top supplement choice for reducing the perception of stress, and number two, my top supplement choices for mitigating the physiologic damage that stress causes in the body. And they'll all be ranked for effectiveness and safety and the quality of the evidence. And so, why is this important, right? Well, the consequences of unmanaged stress, both mental and physical, can be devastating. Stress quietly affects your mood and your sleep and your immune system and your hormones, right? And even your cardiovascular health. So given that context, let's take a look at the supplements with the best research. But before we start, I need to explain one just quick sort of research term because I'll reference it a couple times. You'll often see something called SMD, or standard mean difference. And basically what it means is like how big of an effect did an intervention have, in this case, supplements on stress. So the simple version is an SMD of 0.2 or less means it had a small effect. An SMD, right, a standard mean difference around 0.5 is a moderate effect. And if it's above 0.8, that's a higher effect or larger effect, right? So when you hear an SMD over 1.0, that's not subtle. That means the intervention is not only outperforming the placebo, but it's doing so with a large effect, not just statistically, but clinically. So keep that in mind. So let's start out with supplement part one, the supplements that reduce your perception of stress, right? Your stress resiliency. Number three is phosphatidylserine. And phosphatidylserine doesn't really get a lot of attention, but it's quite a workhorse. It's a natural component of brain cell membranes, and it helps your brain sort of communicate more efficiently under stress. So when you're under pressure, your brain sends signals that tells your body to release stress hormones like cortisol. And that's called the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And phosphatidylserine appears to turn down the volume of that signal so the stress response doesn't overshoot. So in practical terms, that means that people often feel less reactive, less wired, and more emotionally steady, especially during mental or work-related stress. It doesn't sedate you, it doesn't numb emotions, it simply helps prevent the stress response from being unnecessarily amplified. Human studies show reductions in perceived stress and improved emotional regulation, particularly under mental or physical stress conditions. And the effect sizes for phosphatidylserine are a little smaller than the next two supplements we're going to get to, but tolerability is excellent and it pairs well with exercise and sleep interventions. So the bottom line is phosphatidylserine isn't really flashy, but it's steady and it's safe. All right, let's get to number 2 on the list. Number 2 would be ashwagandha. Now, ashwagandha is probably the most well-known of like the stress supplements, right? And for once, the hype isn't totally wrong. A recent systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials found that when you pool the results of all these studies, ashwagandha significantly reduced stress and anxiety with very large effect sizes. The stress SMD that we talked about earlier was negative 1.75, and the anxiety SMD was negative 1.55. So those are very, very large effect sizes that it reduced stress by. Now those are big numbers, and across studies, the direction of the effect was remarkably consistent. Ashwagandha appears to lower the perceived stress, primarily through the central nervous system modulation and not sedation, which is key. So the bottom line is ashwagandha has strong effects with reasonable safety. Now let's get to the number 1 supplement for reducing perceived stress, and that would be saffron, right? If you only remember one supplement from this video, it's this one. Saffron has some of the strongest human data that we have for reducing perceived stress and anxiety. Saffron stands out because it has unusually strong human data for stress-related outcomes. This 2024 systematic review and meta-analysis of 46 other randomized controlled trials studied saffron and found very large pooled effect sizes for saffron across multiple domains, including anxiety and mood and sleep. And although they didn't report SMD specifically, the magnitude of the effects was similar to what we would consider a very large SMD, or standardized mean difference, meaning the improvements, again, were not subtle and consistently favored saffron over placebo across many studies. And importantly, saffron was also found to be just as good or better than conventional medications for cognitive disorders, depression, anxiety, ADHD, OCD, and it exhibited good tolerance with very few side effects. And what makes it even more compelling is that saffron doesn't just work in chronic settings. In a recent randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study in healthy young men, saffron performed very well. Now, in this study, they made men stick their hands in ice-cold water while they performed arithmetic tasks. I don't know who comes up with these things or why people sign up for volunteering for these studies, but it takes all kinds of people. But who am I to judge? The results speak for themselves. A single dose of standardized saffron extract reduced their subjective stress and anxiety in the men compared to those taking the placebo. So they didn't feel as stressed. But not only did it reduce their feelings of stress and anxiety, it actually delayed cortisol and cortisone peaks, suggesting that it has a real-time, immediate buffering of the stress response rather than just simple sedation. So this suggests that saffron can meaningfully reduce how stress is perceived while also reducing the body's physiologic stress response. So the bottom line here is that saffron consistently improves stress perception with excellent tolerability in human data. So now let's move on to the second half of the video. Let's move on to supplements that may not actually make you feel less stress, but instead they protect your body from the damage that stress causes. Because up to this point, we've been pretty much talking about supplements that mainly change how stressed you feel, your anxiety level, emotional reactivity, and your sense of being overwhelmed. But here's something important to understand. Feeling stressed and being damaged by stress are not the same thing. There are supplements that can make you feel instantly calmer, and you might not notice the stress, you might still be busy, you might still be under pressure, but what they do instead is reduce what stress is actually doing to your body. So they help blunt excessive stress hormones, reducing inflammatory signaling, protecting sleep, improving how well your body adapts to repeated stress over time. So these aren't like take it and feel relaxed. These are more like protective gear. They don't remove the stressor, but they reduce the wear and tear that the stress causes on your system. So with that in mind, let's talk about the supplements that best reduce the physiologic damage of stress. Now, number 3 on the list would be holy basil. Holy basil is a good example of a supplement that may not dramatically change how stressed you feel, but it certainly would change how your body responds to stress. It has a long history of use in Ayurvedic medicine as what's called an adaptogen. But what's more interesting is that modern research suggests that it directly targets the stress hormones itself. So in experimental models, standardized holy basil extracts have been shown to prevent stress-induced rises in cortisol, or corticosteroid in the rodent equivalent, and to improve stress endurance and resilience. So mechanistically, this appears to involve dampening that brain's stress signaling pathways that we talked about earlier, that HPA axis, right? What the brain tells the adrenal glands to do. So holy basil fits into this second category, not necessarily something that you take to instantly feel calmer, but something that can reduce the hormonal and physiologic wear and tear of chronic stress over time. So second on this list would be rhodiola. Now rhodiola is also an adaptogen, but with different personality. So if you need more information on this, I did a video specifically on adaptogens that you can find right here. So again, instead of calming you down like supplements that we mentioned earlier, rhodiola rosea improves stress resilience, your body's ability to function under pressure. Human trials show improvements in fatigue, cognitive performance, stress tolerance, specifically in mentally demanding or high stress environments. So it's especially used for people who feel burned out, but not necessarily anxious. So the bottom line is that rhodiola is better for resilience than it is for relaxation. Now, number one on the list, we've actually already talked about. It's ashwagandha. Ashwagandha earns a second spot in this video, but for a different reason. In multiple human trials, ashwagandha reliably lowers cortisol, particularly morning cortisol. In fact, this review looked at 52 other studies that looked at supplements that can modify the HPA axis, and they only included human trials in this. So let me read the final sentence in the results section where they say, the most consistent finding was a morning cortisol lowering effect from ashwagandha supplementation. Now, modulating the negative effects of chronic stress is important, right? Sleep quality, blood sugar regulation, immune balance, like muscle recovery, they're all important. They're all modulated by stress. So the bottom line is ashwagandha doesn't just change how you feel stress, but now we see it actually changes how the body processes stress. So here's the key takeaway, right? Supplements are not a substitute for fixing your life. Supplements are what we say they are. They're supplements. They're supplementing other things that you can do to help. But when used strategically, the right ones can reduce how intensely stress is perceived, and number two, blunt the excessive stress hormone response, and number three, improve the resilience without sedation. But if I had to summarize, exercise is still the key, right? Saffron has the cleanest overall evidence. Ashwagandha has the biggest effect sizes on perceived stress and the negative effects that stress has on your body. And finally, adaptogens can be used when stress is unavoidable. And lastly, if I had one piece of advice that might be the most important way to reduce your stress, turn off that 24-hour news channel.